Our next presenter is Crystal Watkins. Crystal Watkins is the Assistant Regional Director for the Dallas-Fort Worth Regional Office in the Office of Compliance and Enforcement. She has a Bachelor of Science in Biology and an MS in Wildlife and Fisheries Science from Texas A&M University. Crystal has worked for TCEQ since 2012 as an environmental investigator and then as a team leader, both for the Public Water Supply Program before her current role. Her duties while in the PWS program included conducting drinking water investigations, managing a team of environmental investigators, and helping with the interpretation of rules and regulations. Please welcome Crystal Watkins.
Good morning, everyone. So I have a tendency to talk fast, so if anybody wants to go like this, I know that I'm going really fast. So my goal for today's presentation, preparing for a groundwater investigation, is to try to prevent you from having one violation during your next CCI. Like it was introduced, I've been with the agency over 13 years now, most of it in PWS. And so I've had quite a bit of experience with groundwater investigations, and also I'm going to show you some pictures from some of our infamous systems so I can show you what not to do. So if your system looks completely opposite from the picture, know you're doing a great job. So what we're going to talk about today is why are we doing something called a comprehensive compliance investigation or your inspection, what to expect before, during, and after your inspection, some common violations, and some tools for your operator toolbox. So your comprehensive compliance investigation is an on-site review from the source to the end of your facility to determine if you are producing safe and adequate drinking water. And so the reason why we have to do this investigation is that TCEQ has something called primacy, in which EPA has given us the authority to conduct CCIs to fill that sanitary survey requirements. So EPA calls it a sanitary survey, we call it a CCI, or comprehensive compliance investigation. Now, if you're a community water system, so you serve people who are majority using their water for purposes at home, you're considered community, we have to conduct those investigations every 3 years. If you're considered a non-community system, we conduct those every 5 years. So our non-community systems are going to be things like schools, gas stations, restaurants, camps. You're going to be our non-community systems in which we will only see you about 5 years. So your CCI is going to be your full-scale investigation where we will look at the majority of your records and your facilities, but there may be individual investigations that could happen periodically through in those 5 or 3 year periods. So what to expect? Your regional staff will contact you, and whoever's listed as the PWS contact or your public water supply contact, either on Drinking Water Watch, which is going to change in the next couple of weeks, or on our last investigation report, and schedule the investigation. So we will typically give you no more than 14 days, and we will send you an email confirming the date, the time, the location. And one thing that's going to be important is that they're going to send you something called our records request list. So in that list is all the records that we would like to review during the inspection. Typically, we'll ask you to gather the last 12 months. So your last 12 months of back teas, your last 12 months of your weekly chlorine residuals and whatnot, but if your investigator wants more information, they will tell you that. So how can you prepare? So your pre-work before the investigation, what you want to do is gather your records and review. So when you get that TCEQ required list, there's going to be items listed in order. Some of the most successful investigations that we see is when people organize their paperwork in that order. So if item number 12 is your monitoring plan, if you want to put a sticky that says item number 12, it means that the investigator can go through the paperwork a little bit faster, especially if some of y'all get nervous when we're on site. What you want to do is, I know for some of our cities, they'll have their building inspectors who do CSIs or maybe even backflow. You're going to want to pull some of those records from that department, or you can have that department available on site while you're doing those during the investigation. You're going to want to go through your facilities and just take a look around, inspect the tank flaps, look at your well sealing block, repair your fences, and the number one thing, double check your chlorine residual. We know all of you do the TCQ bump, which is when we come out, the chlorine residual is a 4.5 or a 6, and we see that regularly you keep it at a 1.0. Hey, as long as you have chlorine in your system, we are happy. But you don't want to wait to begin correcting a deficiency. So if you notice that your fence is a little loose or some of the wires, you can start tightening that up or sealing some of those gaps in some of your facilities. What to expect? We have an entrance meeting, and I know this sounds very scary, but it's just depending on what type of facility you are. It could mean that we're just going to meet at the water plant and we're on the back of the tailgate looking at paperwork, or we could be at a large municipality and we're in a conference room where everybody is talking about the way that the investigation is going to go. Typically, we will review paperwork. I will let you know that in the summer, we tend to do it opposite because it's hot. So your investigator might ask you to go, let's go out in the field at first, and then we'll review the paperwork later on in that day. We will do an evaluation of your facilities. So we'll start at the beginning where your water is produced and all the way through into distribution, where we will typically ask you to go to one of your routine sites to monitor for chlorine and pressure. Just because I've been on an inspection where a city took me to just a random house, and the lady came out and said, I almost shot y'all. I didn't know who was rolling up in my front yard. So, make sure that if you're taking us to somewhere, it's somewhere where people are familiar that people are going to be in their yard taking samples. And then we'll do an exit interview where we note next steps or any violations that we are going to note. So, like I said, in the entrance meeting, we're going to outline your investigation objectives, arrange for what personnel is going to accompany the investigators. If you have a very large system, you may have multiple investigators so that they can be more efficient with the time. So if you have lots of facilities, you might want to keep that in mind, that maybe you'll have one group that stays and does paperwork, and then you have a group that immediately goes out in the field so that we're not wasting or taking up too much of your time doing the investigation. We'll discuss any safety policies and PPE. When the investigator is contacting you for your CCI to schedule it, if you have any construction or anything going on, you might want to let them know they're there so they can make sure they bring any hard hats or any safety vests during that time. And then, of course, we want to make sure we identify all the individuals present. So one thing I do want to highlight is a connection count. So when we're conducting our investigation, we're going to ask you how many connections you serve and what is your population. So connection is going to be a single-family residential unit or commercial industry. So if you serve nothing but homes and you're a small community water system, each home is going to equal one connection. However, let's say you serve an apartment building, you could have 1 meter, but that apartment unit can have 7 connections. So one thing you want to do in your pre-investigation is keep that in mind. Identify if you have any apartments, any mobile homes, mobile home parks that you serve, and then figure out how many connections are in each one of those meters. So this is a list of the records that we ask for. When we send you that list of records, some of the things may not apply to you. So if you're a system that only uses free chlorine and you see on the list that we're asking for like a nitrification action plan, that doesn't apply. So if anything does not apply to you, then what you can do is just ignore it and we can move on to the next step. So for my purchased water systems that only purchase water, we would need to see your well completion data just because you wouldn't have that. So I want to highlight some of the records that we tend to see the most problems with and see a lot of violations that are cited. First one is your monthly operating report. So this is required for every water system to collect the amount of volume of water treated and distributed, the amount of chemical use, and the disinfectant residual monitoring records. Now, one thing I do want to emphasize is that for groundwater and purchased water systems, this is not required to be in one big report. Only surface water systems are required to have a surface monthly operating report in kind of one big thing. But if you have 3 different pieces of paper or 3 different records that you're keeping for this, this is totally fine. If you have less than 250 connections, you have to monitor your volume of water treated and amount of chemical use weekly. And then if you're more than 250 connections, you have to monitor that information daily. Now for disinfectant residual, there is going to be a slight change in the rule. Instead of being weekly, you have to monitor the disinfectant residual once every 7 days. So for the other things, if you monitor for the volume of water treated on a Monday, and then that next week you monitor it on a Thursday, that's technically once a week, so you're compliant. However, if we come and find that you're monitoring your disinfectant residual on a Monday, and the next time you monitoring it is on a Thursday, that is considered a violation because that's more than 7 days. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Some of the common mistakes we see is not providing enough data. So if you're supposed to be monitoring at least daily or once a month or once a week, you're only monitoring once a month. And we tend to see this a lot with our purchased water system. You get that information from your supplier of how much water you used, and you think that's, and then they send down, you're like, here's our monthly operating report. You still have to do it every week. Another thing we see, especially for chemical usage, especially if you're refilling like a chlorine barrel every time, they report how many bottles that they put into their reservoir. So you might say, I used 3 bottles of 5 gallons of chlorine. Well, did you really use 15 gallons? Or maybe that's how much you had it to refill. So we want to know how much you are using in chemicals when you are treating your water versus how much you're just putting into the reservoir. And of course, the disinfectant residual of monitoring it once every 7 days is something we see where they monitor it weekly. Again, like I said, monitoring on a Monday and then monitoring on a Thursday, that's not compliant because the rule says once every 7 days. Now, we know a lot of water systems will just run everything on the same day. So your disinfectant residual, you might get into a habit in which you're recording your volume of water treated and your chemical usage. You're just doing it every 7 days. Because if you're already out there doing disinfectant residual, you might as well check everything else. And that's a really, really good best management practice. Tank inspection forms. So our rule says you have to inspect all tanks and pressure tanks annually. So if you have a pressure tank that's large enough and it has an inspection port, that has to be inspected interiorly every 5 years. But the expectation is for your ground storage tanks, the interior and exterior is inspected every year. And each tank must have its own inspection form. So if you have 2 ground storage tanks and 2 pressure tanks, you need to have 4 tanks in total for us to review. And this is something that gets a lot of people, they think they have to use a third-party contracting inspection company. You do not. The rule says you either have to have water supply or water system personnel or a contracted inspector company, so you can do it. So if you feel comfortable climbing up that elevated storage tank, have at it. Or you can pay one of the companies that we've heard to come out and send divers. But you are empowered to do the inspections yourself. Now, why is it important to do the inspections? So you can see what's on the inside. So on this top left, it's kind of hard to see. This is a white poly tank that was exposed to sunlight. And in the very bottom of that tank is algae. So if you have a white poly tank, please put a housing over it so there's not sunlight, but there was thick amounts of algae that was coming out, and we found out because of a complaint about an earthy taste to the water. And when we came out, there was just algae It was gross. Not as gross as the dead mockingbird in the tank. This is one of the first inspections I did as an investigator, and I climbed. This is the very first day, very first tank of the day, and there was a dead bird. Fortunately, the pump station had not been used in about a month, and the last time someone had came in was 2 weeks ago when an inspection company came to inspect their tank. So the thought process was when the hatch was open, bird flew in, closed it, didn't check. So we asked them to drain it and clean it. And then that was the first of 12 tanks that I climbed that day. And by the end of it, my arms were jello, but there was no other birds. So I was happy about that. And then this one is just a less nefarious picture. That's just the inside of a pressure tank to just show the rusting that is inside of that tank that occurred. So you want to know what the condition of your pressure tank is, so you don't want to have a failure at a critical point like in the middle of the summer. Here's just some forms. I know they talked about our form in the intro, that it was very simple, but it still is it's compliant and it's very useful. And so you can use this form, which is a TCEQ form, and once again, you need a form for every tank, and then just include this information. If you want the divers and the videos and everything else, have at it too, but this is still adequate and compliant to meet the rules. So just kind of going through some of our items that we see is, again, the one tank, one form issue. We can't tell if you note of an issue with one of your tanks, if it's all on one form. If you said there was an issue, is it tank 2 or is it the east tank? And then not inspecting your pressure tank with an inspection port. So usually we see these for tanks that are about, pressure tanks that are about 1,000 to a little bit more of a, so if you have the little blue bladder tanks, those can't be open, so you don't have to worry about the interior inspection. But if you have a large enough one with the port, again, we're gonna be looking for that 5 years, every 5 years. Flushing logs. So dead end mains have to be flushed on a monthly basis. And the requirement of the rule is that you have to have the dates that the dead end mains are flushed, and they have to be kept for 2 years. So while we only require that the dates of the dead end mains to be flushed, I recommend for best management practices, and if any of you have ever had a complaint investigation, you want to have more information, because you want to show, hey, I flushed it, maybe this is how many gallons, this is what my chlorine residual was. Like I said, that's not necessary, but it could be good. The only thing we require is dead end main flushing. And this water system has a really bad iron issue, and so this is them flushing, and you can tell they've been flushing a long time, and there's still brown water coming out of that of that flush hydrant. Some of the common mistakes we see is not having a flush log. So again, if you have a dead end main, you want to flush, you have to have a flush log. If you have a loop system, the requirement is that you flush as customer request. So you may or may not have a flushing log. And the biggest thing is also not having the date of the flushing. So you can see on this flush log, you can see they just put when it says date flush, they just put water loss. Well, how am I supposed to know if you actually are meeting the rule? So they got a violation. Every single one of their systems got a violation until they fixed it. It took about 10 times before they realized they should fix it. This on the right is just something that a larger water system is keeping. They're keeping water loss records. And I know, even though the TCQ does not require it, I know Texas Water Development Board might request it for a water loss audit. So that's why it's also good information or good practice to keep that too, especially for Texas Water Development Board uses. So we have a plant operations manual. The plant operations manual requirement changed in the last 2 to 3 years after Winter Storm Uri. It's a lot more expansive, and the good news is that small business and local government has created a new template. So if you go on the TCQ website and you type in plant operations manual, I actually think they call it the operations and maintenance manual. If you're familiar with our new guidance document for the monitoring plan and how it's laid out, it's almost exactly laid out that way. And so with the plant operations manual, you kind of create it once and then you update it as needed. So this new guidance document by small business is going to be fantastic for making sure you meet all the requirements of the rule. So things like, if you're out of chlorine, do you have a secondary vendor? What is your critical plant equipment? What is your key personnel? What other info it is? And the point of the plant operations manual or your SOP is that, if someone is out, you can give this to a junior operator and they should be able to follow it and can identify, I need to call this vendor to get more chlorine. I need to call Hawk to go do our calibrations, et cetera. So this is, I found out about the new plant operations manual right after I created this presentation. So this is a little bit out of date, but there is some other regulatory guidances from all small business and local government that talks about plant operations manual. We have seen these as well. So you want to talk about what is your daily, monthly, quarterly, annually requirements. If you have any emergency responses, and of course, make sure that your emergency contact information is updated. One thing I have noticed, it's not a violation, but especially if you've been working with one inspector and investigator for a very long time, they will just put their name and number as their emergency TCQ contact. Well, if something happens on a Friday at midnight, they're not checking their phone. So I recommend for TCQ, what you want to do as the emergency contact is put the 1-800 number for 24-hour spill response. We have a contracted company that is answers that call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and each of the regions has an emergency response team that has someone that's answering that phone, a cell phone every day. And so if you have an emergency, you can reach somebody in the region, and then that region person luckily might be a public water supply investigator, or they can reach out to the PWS team to get you the assistance that you need. I had to learn that out at the beginning of the fiscal year, or in September, October, I got the 8 o'clock call of there was a backflow event in a city and they didn't know what was causing the issue. And so the emergency response coordinator knew I was a public water supply person and sent it to me, and we got that whole situation straightened out. Comment issues is again for getting emergency contact information and making sure you're updating it. So if it says the president is Joe Smith and it's been Bob Johnson for the last 10 to 15 years, you might want to update it. You want to make sure you're providing enough detail. So again, the point and goal of this plant operations manual is that a junior operator or somebody could take that SOP, and if your lead operator is out, they can go through the steps to make sure that the water system is still running. And then again, not updating it. So if you add in new wells, if you go for free chlorine to chloramines, you're gonna wanna put that in there because there's gonna be different things you need to do. So, with your vendor for chloramines, it's not just gonna be chlorine, it's going to be ammonia as well. So backflow prevention test and maintenance forms, this is part of a cross-connection control program, which will ensure that you can protect your system from any contamination from an outside source. So a really good CCC or a cross-connection control program has backflow tests, has a customer service inspection program, and either has an ordinance or customer service agreements. And so these backflow devices have to be, for now, tested by licensed backflow prevention assembly testers. And the most common cross-connection is a garden hose. So garden hose in a barrel, pressure, there's a line break, all of that yucky water in that barrel can back siphon into the distribution system. And again, like I said, backflow is the undesirable reversal of the flow of water. So, we see people throwing their water hoses into a pool, and you're like, great, oh, that's not a big deal. But imagine it's a animal vet clinic, and they just did a surgery, and they put all their tools with the blood and everything in the sink, or a chemical manufacturing company that has a hose of toxic methyl ethyl death, and there could be a backflow. So This is why having a really good cross-connection control program can help ensure that you do not have to issue a boil water notice, do not use, do not consume, et cetera. This is a long list, it's 29047F, I believe. It has a list of all the items that are a common things that we see during our investigation. And it'll also tell you what type of backflow device it needs. So the best backflow device is an air gap, but the second best is gonna be a RPZ or RPBA, reduced pressure principal backflow device. Now, irrigation systems that we see most commonly only need double checks, and those only have to usually be tested upon installation. But things that are installed around for a health hazard has to be inspected on an annual basis. So some of the common forms we see with backflow is the form is not, you're using a very old form. The form has been updated in 2019. Make sure you're using the form. You want to make sure you're not using anything that deviates from the TCQ approved form. So there's only a handful of forms in which we say you have to use our version, and the CSI and the BPAT forms are the two ones I know for sure that you need to make sure that you're using our version. You can use a different version of a plant operations manual or even your own tank inspection form, but make sure you are using the TCQ, CSI, and backflow form. Another thing we see is that the test gauge accuracy is out of date. So on a backflow form, not only is your license information is on there for the backflow tester, but we want to verify that the gauge that they're using is accurate. So what we see is either it's very old, and so I've seen them 2 to 3 years out of date, or they don't put anything at all. They have to test that gauge for accuracy annually. And then finally, you want to make sure you're keeping the original form. I know a very popular method that people are using is going electronic, and we like electronic. But if you're going to try and use an electronic form versus just maintaining the paper form, you have to get a permission or an exception from the TCQ to do so. And we've seen these come through all the time, so it's not a very difficult electronic form to, or exception to obtain. But if your inspector goes out and sees that you're using an electronic method of keeping your backflow forms and you don't have that paper copy, you will get a violation. Well calibration, so if you have a well, your well has to be calibrated at least once every 3 years. And so you want to make sure that you have some kind of calibration verification for your well meter. So whether, I know some people will just replace their well meters every 3 years, just keep your receipt for the order of the new one. A lot of them will come with tags, or if you have a company that will come out and do your inspections, they'll put a tag on the inside of the cap. Make sure to keep that, or even take a picture just in case you leave that cap open and it gets worn away through weather. I know emergency preparedness plans are everybody's favorite thing, right? Yes, we love being prepared. So you know the EPP rules. We know that there's requirements. Your investigator may ask you for a copy of your EPP. All of us all investigators have access to your EPPs. So some of your investigators may have already looked at your EPP, identified what options you're using, and are looking for the different options and things you need to become compliant with the EPP requirements. But one of the biggest things that you want to make sure is that you're maintaining that update. So if you had an option, let's say you were going to use a permanently installed generator, which I think is option 1, and for some reason your permanently installed generator doesn't work anymore. You got to go to another option because option 1 is no longer valid. And your investigator can come out, we can see your generator is broken and busted, and we might cite you a violation for that. So make sure that you're keeping up with that. The new rule says that every 3 years, I believe that this should be updated. And so just keep an eye out. You know, if you're a community water system, you know your CCI is every 3 years. In that year you're getting a CCI, go ahead and look at your EPP. And of course, there's information about generator maintenance. Again, this is something you can use a contract company, generator company to use, but you can also do it yourself if you feel comfortable. and you have to run that generator on the load, I believe 30% load on a monthly basis. So your investigators might ask you, do you have information about your generator maintenance? And so lucky for you, you came to PDW and got a copy of the generator maintenance form, and so you can just provide that to them. And then, of course, TCQ YouTube page is always a really great resource. We recommend our operators to go, and we even recommend our own investigators go to look at that for training and other information. Now, this people like this part because this is where I show all the gross photos and the crazy photos. So be shocked. What to expect? We're going to look at your wells, if you're a groundwater system. If you're a purchased water system, we may ask where your meter is, but we may not necessarily need to see it. We want to see any chemical treatments. Your chlorinator, are using polyphosphate for sequestration or anything else. We're going to look at your ground pressure and elevated storage tanks. We're going to look for any backflow devices, and then we're going to calculate capacity as part of our investigation. So this is some of our common things we see. You have to have a sanitary control easement, which means you don't have certain hazards within 150 feet. Within 50 feet, you shouldn't have animals. So this blue thing right here is a well. What is this right? Can anybody see what's that right there to the left? A cow. Are they maintaining the sanitary condition of the well? No. Do you think we could have cited a violation against that? Right. You can't see this here, but this is a baby kitten next to the pressure tank, which is in the same place as the well. During the investigation, my investigator was told, oh yeah, we had double the cats before, but some weird disease came and wiped out half of them. And we're just like, okay. This place was also a restaurant. And so this right here is the hole where the cats were going in and out at their leisure. Isn't it great that they created a lovely shelter where your drinking water for your soda is located? And then we see a lot of dog houses over wells. The dog house is a covering, but we want to make sure that that covering, that well, is also enclosed in a fence for protection. This is just out in the open. So this is our vehicle right here. Here's the ground storage tank. Here's the well, just out in the open. Another thing that we look at is your well casing and the condition of your well. So do you have a well casing vent that's covered by 16 mesh? Do you have any holes or cracks in your wellhead? So what we're trying to do, and a lot of our rules are to make sure that we're protecting the sanitary condition of the facilities. So we're trying to lower any pathway of contamination. And so this hole is the perfect spot for some kind of contamination to get in. We're looking at how you're disinfecting. So you have to disinfect prior to storage. A trash can is not an appropriate method to keep all of your disinfection chemicals. So, you see the blue barrels, if you get 55 gallons, they decided they didn't want to pay for that, so they just put it in a trash can. I hope it was a new trash can. I can't confirm or deny. And then you can see here, this is out in the open. You want to make sure that all of your hypochlorination solutions are in a secure enclosure to protect them from adverse conditions. One of the things from Winter Storm Uri and the emergency preparedness plans and these new rules is protecting critical components. So if your disinfection equipment is just outside into the open and you have a code snap come through, your equipment is going to fail. So the way they can make sure they're compliant with the rules is just putting a little house. You don't have to do necessarily a whole building. We have seen people create little box enclosures with a lift lid. That is perfectly fine. Another thing we see with water storage, you see that white poly tank? That's the one that had the algae in it. So this is after, but still we cited them for having a white poly tank out in the open. Because while they did clean the algae out of it, it's still gonna happen again. You wanna make sure that it's meeting AWWA rules. So having a poly tank, either a black or white poly tank, does not meet AWWA requirements. However, you can provide information to the technical review and oversight team, and they can provide you with an exception to the rule to use a tank. I will tell you, if you have a black poly tank, you're gonna have a much easier time getting that approved than a white poly tank. So if you do have that, you might wanna keep that in mind. Water lines have to be installed less than 24 inches below ground. And if you do have any lines crossing the water or a creek, you have to have special encasements for that. This is a water line just crossing on top of a stream. And if you can't tell, here, there's snow on the ground. What do you think happened to that line? It froze. As I was walking through this creek, you could just see pieces of broken PVC when this line has broken and failed several times. And you would think common sense would be to bury, but there was no common sense at this water system. So this is also a water line. So this is a water line. This is the road. I believe that was like 14 inches. And they were having issues where they would come and repair the line and the road companies would keep hitting their line. Well, yeah, because your line is only like 12 to 14 inches below the ground. So, you know, there's these things that you can do as operators to make sure that you're protecting the resiliency of your system. So burying your lines below frost line means you can guarantee that there's water when there's a cold snap and also still have water when they're doing construction in that area for roads. We also have a general maintenance violation, and this is kind of our catch-all. This is where we catch things like overgrown facilities. So there's 2 tanks and a pressure tank in that area. Insulation, we understand that you have to use insulation, but make sure that it's installed properly. And again, make sure that you have proper drainage around your ground storage tank. Again, this water, if you have some kind of leak or hole, water can intrude into your ground storage tank, and now all that water is contaminated. Some more photos. Do you think this is safe? Do you think there's clean and sanitary conditions in that one? This right here is the well. It's like a well covering. They said that that's how they were protecting their well. We went onto one side, you walk around the other side, you see this gaping hole. How is that protecting and securing the well? This one here was really fun. This is a pressure tank, and you can tell here from all the rust that the pressure tank was rusty and had been leaking. They decided to put a screw in the pressure tank to prevent it from leaking anymore. That's like a real danger. Imagine if that thing blows, where's that bolt gonna go? Just in general, some of the pictures we see of condition, rustiness is not a good sign. Making sure you're keeping things free of rust and identifying why are things causing rust. You don't want to put your chlorine bottle or your chlorine facilities in the same place as electrical because it's gonna cause issues. And so if we open up a door and we just see there's a whole bunch of rust on the door and then we see your service pump is over there, we know that's not good. Your fence, make sure your fence is secure. You know, we want it to be standing up straight, not leaning over. This is a security issue, just in making sure that people can't just jump over into your facilities. We know people like to go into facilities and steal copper and other stuff. Don't give them away in our entrance to get in. Like I said, the 29046M8 is about generators. That's part of that new rule. It's been out about 2 years, but still, the more we mention it, the more you get to realize this, making sure that you're running it under 30% load, at least 30 minutes every month, or whatever is your manufacturer's specificity. Make sure you have chlorine. Do the TCQ chlorine bump. If we come out and it's a 5.0, that's not a violation. Make sure it's above a 0.2 free chlorine, a 0.5 total chlorine if you use chloramines. You want to make sure you have 35 PSI, and this is throughout your entire distribution. So don't be surprised if your investigator asks you to take them to the very end of the distribution system, because that's usually the place where there could be worse quality because it's the oldest water age. To kind of start wrapping up some things, you're going to get an exit interview form that is going to list the violations, and then afterwards, you're going to get a letter with a summary of investigation findings, and then your compliance due date begins at the date of the notice of violation unless specified on the exit interview form. The one violation in which the compliance due date is specified in the exit interview form is low chlorine. You have 24 hours from what we noted on that exit interview form to get the chlorine residual up. So this is just some information about updated forms. Like I said, customer service inspections, backflow, your RTCR sample siting plan. There are loads of regulatory guidances that I still reference to this day, and I've been doing this 13 years. All of those copies are over there, and the TCQ used to provide those publications for free. They don't because it's online. So if you want a hard copy, go over to the TA room, get all the copies of everything so you can have it on hand. We do have some additional resources via the TCQ website. The helpful people I want to highlight is small business and local government and FMT assistance. These are free assistance for you, and small business, local government is confidential. So if you ask them for help fixing a violation, they will not come back to the investigators and say, well, this water system came back and said that there was a violation, you should go check it. No, small business is there to help you and it's confidential. And with that, I'm Crystal Watkins, and I am able to take any questions. Thank you.